Michif means Métis in the language. So when we say Michif language or even Lilang Michif, it means language of the Métis or Métis language. And even when we say Michif Nia, or someone identifies saying I am Michif, they are saying I am Métis. At first, someone might think that it's just a simple combination of Cree or French put together, but when you really look into it, there are communities around it, a culture around it, and of course, the most important part, there's a people behind it. And Michif is very important to us as Métis people. We do consider it as one of the languages that we did, well, it's the language that we did create, and it was one of the languages historically that we spoke in our communities. It was one of the ones that was taken away through colonialism, residential schools, 60 Scoop, just all of these policies that were kind of put against us so we could speak English or French. In my personal family experience, from what I hear, my great-great-grandfather, or my great-grandfather, and probably my great-great too, but my great-grandfather, he spoke Michif. And he spoke various languages from what I hear. He spoke Cree, he spoke Blackfoot, he spoke even French and English. It was very common for us to speak multiple languages in the historic times in that regard. So for me, it is very important to learn Michif, for one, because it was the language that people in my family spoke, but also too, it is the language that the Métis people spoke. And being a Métis person, it's very important to me to bring back the language, because the way it was taught to me was that the language and the culture, they are mere reflections of each other. You can't separate one without the other, and it came from the culture that we lived in. We were buffalo hunters, we worked in the fur trade, we had ancestry that were from Europe, of course, but we also had grandmothers and cookums that lived off the land and knew the teachings of the land. So even those values came into our language. You really do have to travel into Michif speaking communities to really find people who what you consider still fluent in that regard. A lot of them are older, so it's very important to me to learn this language, learn it from those elders too, and those knowledge keepers, so we can continue to pass it on. It is very important to me. And as I say, like for me, I specifically am learning what they call Southern Michif in that regard. And with Southern Michif, we'll say Tanshe instead of Tanse, and even to, there's a lot of times where you will see maybe a bit more of French nouns that come in. But the funny part is once you start talking like verbs and the verb rules, you start looking into the Cree language at that point, right? So it's really interesting, once again, when you look back at the people who made this language. It wasn't just they slammed two languages together, but more that they totally knew what it took to create this language that we call Michif. In those Michif specific speaking communities, they will still have, I think, generations of people speaking the language, but for a while there was a danger to it. I think now we're on the right curve. There is more funding coming and more resources that are being developed also that are helping people have foundational learning of Michif and even just know what it is. We've learned really great ways how to teach ourselves, teach our own people, and also to find going back to our traditional ways of teaching the language too. A lot of great work's being done. There is a lot of great groups doing a lot of awesome Michif revitalization work across the Métis homeland. So going back, I do see a lot of great things picking up, and I do see a lot of good things happening, and I think more people will be speaking Michif. And even if just people leave that aspect of, oh, it's just a half this, half that language, and being like, wow, okay, there's Southern Michif, there's Northern Michif, and just even if people recognize that, I think that'd be a pretty big deal to me, because it's like people who are even just aware, oh, this is Plains Cree, this is Woodland Cree, this is Swampy Cree. It's very important to recognize those specific languages, because as I say, there's a people behind it, there's a culture, it's living. The language is living.